Isaiah 60 and verse 1. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you.
See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you.
Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn.
Lift up your eyes and look about you. All assemble and come to you. Your sons come from afar, and your daughters are carried on the arm.
Then you will look and be radiant. Your heart will throb and swell with joy. The wealth on the seas will be brought to you. To you the riches of the nations will come.
Young camels of Midian and Ephah, and all come, bearing gold and incense, and proclaiming the praise of the Lord.
Well, sometime last year, 7 days ago to be exact, Pastor John actually read the passage in Matthew 2 about the wise men who came to see Jesus. And that is the passage, as I was explaining in the children's message, that is known as the Epiphany, when Jesus is revealed to the world. And so we usually make the first Sunday of each year, the Epiphany, we observe the Epiphany on the first Sunday of each year. And I think it has been 2, if not 3 years now that I've had the opportunity to be here as Pastor John has taken the first Sunday of January off. So I'm supposed to have been bringing epiphanies this being the 3rd year, but I'm not going to promise anything. An epiphany literally is defined as a new insight or an intuitive grasp of reality as through an event or something simple or striking and illuminating. That is the official definition. So the passage in Isaiah is also a passage that adds something to this idea of epiphany, light shining, God being made known to all the world. There's a comedian on YouTube, I'm not sure where else, but he's known as Michael Jr. And Michael Jr. Speaks of comedy with a formula that he says not only applies to comedy, but applies to life itself. And what he says in comedy, as in life, is that first, there is a setup. And as Michael Jr. explains it, the setup is when the comedian uses his talents and resources to seize every opportunity to ensure the audience is moving in the same direction. And the second element is the punchline, which comes as a surprise when the comedian changes the direction in a way the audience is not expecting, which results in the audience experiencing revelation, joy, and fulfillment expressed through laughter. And so, to me, it is very intriguing that what Michael Jr. is saying about comedy, he says also applies to life in general. And I kind of like that formula. In other words, the setup is when we use our resources. Resources that are often obtained through distress and adversity in life. Difficulties in life make us stronger, and they give us resources so that we can become people who can seize the opportunity as the time comes and bring about a punchline which actually results in revelation, joy, and fulfillment. We even speak, and when I think of epiphany being a discovery, being an intuitive grasp of reality, often through something very simple. We also speak of that aha moment. And as I hear on occasion, there are preachers who have actually shifted from pastoral ministry to become stand-up comics. Maybe because they find that they get more fulfillment through comedy and they experience, they're able to facilitate more epiphanies with their audiences. I don't know. I will not claim that I can facilitate epiphany on Sunday mornings. I believe that God alone can give us a true epiphany. We have to get our epiphany from God. We live in a world that often wants to hear something from a personality. They want to hear a performance. They want to hear something that impresses them, as in maybe eloquence, and yet true epiphany must come from God. And it probably involves things that are much more simple than our world typically expects. And so, epiphany, an illuminating discovery, something like an aha moment when Christ makes himself known to us in a new way. And each one of us can experience epiphany in a unique way. I would not expect to share my own epiphany, if I have truly had one, and expect others to get the same epiphany. Each of us receives our own epiphany from the Lord. And if you happen to be at the pearly gates one day, and the angel is there seemingly evaluating those who are allowed to come in, and you see me standing there, you don't want to say to the angel, pointing to me and saying, well, I'm with him. No, that's not going to work. What? Oh, you already knew that? Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I cannot cause an epiphany. Epiphany is something that is given to us by none other than God alone. And so, this morning I plan to share something that, to me, seems to have been a little bit of an epiphany. It may come as a stretch to you. I'm not expecting you to experience it as epiphany, but I will say we probably need, and if I have some epiphany, we probably need others to also share their experiences of epiphany. It is appropriate in the fellowship of believers, if we have had them, to share our epiphanies. And so I'll attempt to see if we're functioning correctly this morning. And the first reference I'm making is to the office of the Surgeon General. What the Surgeon General is saying is a statement about integrating healthcare systems. Now, as I share this, it is not to say that the Surgeon General has a message for Central Christians if we're supposed to become a healthcare church. That's not what my point is. I'm really referring to the Surgeon General, understanding that all authority comes from God. So the Surgeon General is simply one example of God's authority, because there is no authority except what God's established in Romans 13. And so the Surgeon General is saying that effective integration of prevention, treatment, and recovery services across healthcare systems is the key to addressing substance misuse and its consequences. To me, it's significant that the Surgeon General, having legitimate authority, is really telling us that a day will come when we will go to the doctor, and it will not just be a hospital here and a mental health center there, or a state hospital there, but that healthcare will be integrated. So we will have one healthcare system that treats the entire body. The head probably being the most important part of the body. But today's healthcare system does put substance abuse treatment, and notice the Surgeon General is calling it substance misuse. So contrary to what I said, the term substance abuse has actually been eliminated from the official medical terminology. We are recognizing, the Surgeon General recognizes substance misuse as a healthcare condition to be treated in the healthcare system. He's also saying that there is more to this. And so, yeah. So you can't say that now, that's the I just want to all situated so that we can make it. So you won't have the effects. But I do want to point out that what the Surgeon General is saying is that integrating healthcare is cost effective. So you can scroll down to the next slide. And, you know, I suggested the idea that if I were to say the Surgeon General doesn't sound like he's fully understanding it, as if I know something better, you might think, well, Daniel, the Surgeon General isn't doing research all by himself. The Surgeon General is gathering research from a lot of experts, and so you can't compete with that. And I would agree. You would also notice that the current Surgeon General under the Trump administration is actually echoing the previous Surgeon General. So it's interesting that you have a Surgeon General from a under a Republican administration who is not contradicting the previous Surgeon General. And specifically, it was the previous Surgeon General who was saying that we need to reduce stigma, especially addiction stigma. The current Surgeon General, Dr. Adams, is saying all stigma. Dr. Adams is stating that stigma is the #1 killer in this nation, which to me is important to note because we have authority coming down from the federal government telling us that we have to stop stigmatizing, which is to say labeling, perceiving people as junkies or drug abusers or criminals and whatever else, because that stigma actually prevents them from even being willing to say they need help and to seek help. And so there is authority coming down telling us that we're going to have to put a stop to these judgments, that people who are being judged, being labeled unfairly, being ridiculed, being disrespected, that they're going to have to be respected. That to me is quite a message for the church to understand. He does say that the integration of prevention, treatment, and recovery represents the most promising way to improve access to and quality of treatment. And so, on down a little bit further. And so recent healthcare reform laws, as well as a wide range of other trends in the healthcare landscape, are facilitating already greater integration to better serve individual and public health, reduce health disparities, and reduce costs to society. And on that matter of costs to society, it might be important to point out that back in the 1990s, you can scroll down a little further, back in the 1990s, an organization called the Lewin Group did a study to look at all the costs of alcohol and drug use in America and what it's doing not only in terms of law enforcement, the legal system, the healthcare system, and businesses where employees might be intoxicated at work, and that costs the businesses something. The Lewin Group estimated about $240 billion a year as the cost of America's substance use problem. In 2017, less than 25 years later, another study, after that same manner, finds that figure to actually be closer to $740 billion, about $750 billion a year that we're spending on the substance use problems in this country. And an addiction historian, as he calls himself, William White, says that actually of all that we're spending on addiction, only 2% is being spent toward prevention and treatment. The other 98% is just being spent to clean up the mess that is being left. Now, what I think is important, if that makes any sense to you, we need to add one more thought, which I have found very important. And that is the thought, this next slide. And this was a psychiatrist from the 60s named Dr. Albert Glass, who was speaking on a nuclear symposium talking about nuclear warfare. And what Dr. Glass stated in those days was that when you accent danger, in which there is no chance of survival, people will not be concerned. And I suspect Dr. Glass is referring to and reflecting on some of the tragedies of World War II. We tried to warn Japanese in the cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima to get out because we were going to bomb those cities with a new kind of bomb that they had never seen before, and they dismissed it. The warnings were spoken, they were true, but the people dismissed the warnings. And I think this is what is so profound. I think it doesn't just happen to me. It can happen to anybody attempting to share very important information to people that might be important for all of us to know. You can scroll it on down a little further. And what we get are varied responses. Some might say, well, we've heard this before, or, well, this doesn't really apply to us, or what's this guy's claim to fame, and yada, yada, yada. So we have different kinds of responses to a message that attempts to deliver some critical information. And so there is cause for me to understand that I cannot expect to tell an audience and share this critical information and have everybody jump up from here and just want to know what I recommend that we do, which, by the way, I wouldn't really have a plan at that point. But I do think it's important. And I would also offer this. Let us think about what was Jesus up against in the presentation of the gospel, inviting people to recognize the nearness of the kingdom of God. How difficult would it have been for so many people to hear what Jesus proclaimed and yet just shrug it off? And so, go ahead and put one more slide up there. And we know that in the gospel we see this primary concern for the poor, for the outcast. The gospel comes, as Isaiah proclaims, as good news to the poor, sight to the blind, freedom to the captives, and on and on. So the gospel has come to deliver us from all the difficulties of life. The gospel is God's salvation for people. And yet, we see resistance. We see Jesus speaking and preaching among the outcast, the marginalized, the low-income people, the least of the brothers and sisters. And yet there was opposition from people who claimed to be people of faith. They were the believers, they were the rightful religious leaders, and they were quite opposed to the truth as it was revealed. We also notice that not only is there resistance from people who claim to know God, but people might have experienced captivity, but also found a way to live with it. They may have kind of deal with the aristocracy. They may have found ways to convince themselves that's quite fine. And so they tell the rest of us, well, life's unfair. You just got to deal with it. But their way of dealing with it is not to the glory of God. It's only for their own conveniences. And so people don't want to hear the gospel the way Jesus tells it. It may very well be that what the Surgeon General has to offer us will be rejected by people who are in leadership positions, possibly even people with strong credentials in the healthcare system. But they will not want to follow what the Surgeon General is saying. And this came out about 2.5 years ago. So I don't know that all of us are hearing indications that we've all bought into what the Surgeon General suggests. And I understand those who would say, well, it's going to take a long time. I just cannot dismiss and be aware that this is a message that really represents the best interest of the people. And it really offers something very positive for the very least among us, whether they are the Medicaid recipients or still not on health insurance at all or whatever. The Surgeon General seems to have a message that is good news for the very least in our society. And like the gospel, that message runs into all kinds of obstacles. It gets shut down in various ways and for various reasons, for various ambitions. And I even sense that there might be martyrs who have lived and died even in recent years, even here in our own neighborhoods, and yet their deaths were by various injustices. Their deaths really should have meant something, but we were too busy to notice. We don't realize the presence of martyrs among us, that people might be fighting a good fight and suffering and paying the ultimate price. And we're just too busy to notice. But the gospel represents the interests of people whose lives have been lost, people who have suffered greatly. And certainly there has been much suffering for this cause to which the Surgeon General has spoken. And so I simply encourage people to know that, as the Word teaches us, all authority comes from God. We don't have to think of the Surgeon General as politics as usual. We could know, much more importantly, that God has a message. In fact, God's message is much higher than the office of Surgeon General. And so God calls us to arise, as Isaiah has spoken, to know that our light can shine, to know that people are going to come from around the world to see God's light. We live in a world of opportunism, and yet the revelation of God is not so much an obligation as it is an opportunity. Now, in our world, opportunism is very self-centered, but the opportunity for us with the gospel is to truly receive what the Lord offers to us, the real message to which He calls us, a message that offers us real deliverance and real peace and real satisfaction. When those verses in Isaiah talk about camels or dromedaries coming from different countries, that's a reference to camels that were known to carry merchandise, wealth, as if to reveal that all the wealth of the world is going to be brought to that place where God's light shines. No human charisma can bring people together quite the way God brings people together. And so God's epiphany for us is something that God can work in a very powerful way, so that as disintegrated as Christians might seem to be these days, it is truly God's light that brings us together in a powerful way that our world cannot imagine. And so, this is our hope this morning, and this is indeed God's promise to us. I certainly want to recognize that God's revelation does come as an opportunity and not as an obligation. You don't read anything in the red letters where Jesus is guilting anybody into recognizing their obligations. Don't you recognize your obligations to your brothers and sisters? The revelation of God comes not as an obligation, but as an opportunity. And so God's message is not delivered with intimidation, but with invitation. And this morning, we have an invitation. And as you might have guessed, I can't tell you what number it is, but I will invite you to stand and